What happens when a small act of kindness turns into a battle against prejudice? Malcolm, a former teacher turned community hero, just wanted to serve hot meals to those in need at his neighborhood park. But when a self-righteous Karen calls the cops, accusing him of disrupting the peace, she doesn't realize she's about to expose her own ignorance to the entire community. Watch as a simple barbecue ignites a powerful story of resilience, unity, and unexpected redemption. The smell of sizzling ribs and roasted corn filled the warm summer air at Lincoln Park, a lively spot nestled in the heart of the city. The golden afternoon sunlight bathed the rows of folding tables, each piled high with trays of food. Malcolm Carter, a black man in his late 30s with a warm smile and an air of quiet confidence, stood behind a grill, flipping burgers with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, Malcolm didn't look like the community hero he was, but the dozens of people lining up for a meal would tell you otherwise. Malcolm had a mission: to feed the homeless and bring his community together. A former social worker turned grassroots organizer, he believed in action over words. This wasn't just a BBQ, it was an opportunity for those often overlooked to feel seen, valued, and nourished. Volunteers bustled around him, passing out plates and cups of lemonade to a growing crowd. Teenagers helped with setup, while local families donated food and supplies, creating a symphony of cooperation. "Thanks for doing this, Malcolm," said Mrs. Jenkins, a retired teacher who'd been volunteering at his events for months. "You always know how to lift people up." Malcolm smiled, wiping his brow with a towel. "It's not just me, Mrs. Jenkins. It's all of us working together. That's how we make change." As he spoke, a little boy tugged on his sleeve. "Mister, do you have any more hot dogs?" Malcolm laughed, crouching down to the boy's level. "Coming right up, little man. You like ketchup or mustard?" "Ketchup," the boy said, his face lighting up. From a distance, Karen Hughes watched the scene unfold from her backyard, which overlooked the park. Her lips tightened as she adjusted her sun hat, shielding her pale face from the glare of the sun. To her, this wasn't a beautiful display of community. It was an invasion. Karen, in her mid-50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a sharp nose, prided herself on keeping her neighborhood pristine and orderly. This gathering, with its loud laughter and undesirable types, as she thought of the homeless attendees, was anything but that. "What are they even doing here?" Karen muttered to her small dog, Muffin, who sat yipping at her feet. "This is supposed to be a quiet neighborhood, not some charity case circus." She picked up her phone, snapping pictures of the crowd. "I bet they didn't even get permission for this," she muttered, her irritation bubbling into anger. As she watched Malcolm hand out food with an easy grace, her disdain deepened. Meanwhile, Malcolm continued serving meals, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just across the street. For him, this was about giving back and spreading love, a stark contrast to the bitterness growing in Karen's heart. The contrast between the two couldn't have been sharper, and the day was far from over. Karen, a middle-aged woman with meticulously styled blonde hair and a small dog on a rhinestone leash, marches toward the BBQ area with a look of indignation. Her manicured nails clutch a phone tightly as the scent of grilled meat wafts through the park. Spotting Malcolm, a tall black man with a warm demeanor, flipping burgers on the grill, she raises her voice. "Excuse me? What's going on here?" she demands, her words sharp enough to cut through the chatter of nearby volunteers. Her small dog yaps incessantly at her heels, echoing her agitation. Malcolm, dressed in a simple apron and a baseball cap, turns toward her with a calm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you?" he asks, his tone friendly but professional. Behind him, a few volunteers, mostly young adults, organize donated items and hand out plates of food to a line of homeless attendees. The scene is one of warmth and community, but Karen sees chaos. "You're disturbing the peace," she snaps. "This isn't the place for a gathering like this. You're attracting all kinds of undesirable people to the park." Malcolm tilts his head slightly, trying to gauge her intent. "I understand your concern," he says evenly, "but we have permits for this event. We're just here to provide a meal and some support for folks in need. He gestures toward a clipboard on the table where a neatly printed permit rests. Karen doesn't bother to look. Her voice grows louder, drawing the attention of others nearby. I don't care about your so-called permits. This is a public park. What you're doing is disruptive, and frankly, it's unsafe for the rest of us who live here. Despite her escalating tone, Malcolm remains composed. Ma'am, we're not causing any harm. If you'd like to share specific concerns, I'd be happy to address them. His calm demeanor only seems to fuel Karen's frustration. She folds her arms and scoffs. Oh, I've got concerns, all right. This isn't a soup kitchen, and you don't belong here. A few volunteers notice the rising tension and approach cautiously. One of them, a young woman named Vanessa, asks, Is everything okay here, Malcolm? He nods reassuringly, gesturing for them to stay back. We've got it under control, he says firmly, diffusing the growing crowd. But Karen, noticing the support Malcolm receives, turns red with anger. Under control? You think this is under control? I'm calling the police, she declares, pulling out her phone. Malcolm doesn't flinch. That's your choice, he says simply, meeting her glare. We'll be here, doing what we came to do. His composure disarms some of the onlookers, but Karen spins on her heel, her dog yapping furiously as she stalks away. Malcolm exhales softly, his expression unreadable as the murmurs of volunteers and attendees fill the air. Around him, the energy remains tense but steady. They've dealt with worse before, but Malcolm knows this confrontation is far from over. Karen confidently dialed the emergency number, pacing in agitation while her small dog yapped incessantly. Her voice, laced with urgency and indignation, described a scene she grossly exaggerated. There's a group causing a disturbance. They're making the park unsafe, and it looks like they're breaking the law, she declared, painting Malcolm and the homeless individuals as unruly threats. In reality, the peaceful BBQ continued in the background, with volunteers handing out plates of food and soft music playing in the air. As she ended the call, Karen felt a smug satisfaction. She believed she was enforcing some righteous order. Minutes later, 2 police cars pulled into the park, their lights flashing but sirens off. The officers approached the gathering with cautious curiosity rather than aggression. Malcolm, having noticed their arrival, stepped forward with an air of calm professionalism, permits already in hand. The sight of the uniformed officers created a ripple of unease among the attendees, but Malcolm's steady demeanor reassured them. Good evening, officers, Malcolm said, his tone polite but firm. I'm Malcolm Bryant, organizer of this event. Here's the permit issued by the city for today's BBQ. He handed over the papers without hesitation, maintaining steady eye contact with the lead officer. Before the officer could respond, Karen interjected loudly. You need to shut this down. They're disturbing the peace and attracting all kinds of trouble, she said, her voice rising with frustration. She gestured broadly toward the gathering, but her accusations were met with skeptical glances. Ma'am, we'll review the situation, the officer said, his tone measured as he continued to examine the permits. Another officer walked around, speaking briefly with attendees and volunteers. People were quick to vouch for Malcolm's character and the noble purpose of the event. Malcolm's BBQs have helped my family when we were struggling, one mother said, her young child clutching her hand. He's doing more good for this community than anyone else around here. A homeless man stepped forward, his voice steady despite his rough appearance. He treats us like human beings. This BBQ isn't about trouble. It's about kindness. Karen's frustration boiled over. You're all being conned. He's making a mess of this park and ruining the neighborhood, she exclaimed. The officers exchanged a glance, their patience wearing thin. Ma'am, the lead officer said firmly, we've verified that this event is lawful. Malcolm has all the necessary permits and there's no evidence of any disturbance here. He paused, his tone sharpening. Filing false complaints is a serious matter. Karen's face turned red as murmurs spread among the onlookers. Several bystanders had begun recording the interaction on their phones, their cameras capturing her outburst and the calm response of Malcolm and his supporters. Realizing she had lost control of the narrative, Karen muttered angrily under her breath and stormed off, dragging her barking dog with her. The officers approached Malcolm once more. "Sorry about the trouble," the lead officer said. "You're doing a good thing here. Let us know if you need any support." Malcolm nodded with a polite smile. "Thank you, officers. I appreciate that." As the police departed, the crowd around Malcolm cheered lightly, their voices filled with solidarity. Malcolm, ever humble, waved it off and got back to serving plates of food, his mission undeterred. The video of the park confrontation began circulating online within hours. Shot by multiple bystanders, it showed Karen's exaggerated accusations, her heated outbursts, and Malcolm's poised responses. Within days, the footage had gone viral. Social media christened her BBQ Karen, a moniker that quickly became a trending hashtag. Comments flooded in, condemning Karen's behavior and praising Malcolm's composure. "This is what kindness looks like," one user wrote, sharing Malcolm's story alongside a clip from the video. Another commented, "Imagine calling the cops on someone feeding the homeless." Shameful. The footage struck a chord, sparking heated discussions about racism, privilege, and the societal treatment of homeless individuals. Karen's personal social media accounts were not spared. Her business review pages were inundated with critical comments, causing her ratings to plummet. Even neighbors began distancing themselves from her, sharing anecdotes about her past outbursts. Karen attempted damage control, posting a defensive statement. She claimed that she had been unfairly targeted by the woke mob and was only trying to ensure safety in the park. However, her post backfired spectacularly. Social media users dissected her claims, juxtaposing them with the footage of the actual incident. The more Karen tried to justify her actions, the louder the backlash grew. Meanwhile, Malcolm shared a heartfelt video of his own. In it, he explained the mission behind his barbecues, to create a space of dignity and care for those who had nowhere else to turn. "This isn't about me," Malcolm said in the video, his voice steady and genuine. "It's about how we treat each other. A meal, a smile, a moment of kindness. It can change someone's day, maybe even their life." The video resonated deeply, garnering widespread support. Local businesses began reaching out, offering food donations and supplies for future events. Malcolm's barbecues, once a small community effort, were now gaining recognition on a much larger scale. Karen's online denial began to falter under the weight of the evidence and public outrage. The narrative was no longer hers to control, and she found herself retreating from the spotlight. Malcolm's calm and compassionate perspective had shifted the focus entirely, turning a divisive encounter into a conversation about empathy and community care. Karen sat in her quiet living room, her small dog curled up on the couch beside her. The blinds were drawn, shutting out the world beyond. On her phone, notifications buzzed relentlessly. News articles, angry comments, and videos dissecting her actions from every possible angle. Each headline seemed more damning than the last. "BBQ Karen sparks outrage with racist call to police," "When privilege meets compassion, the Malcolm James story," and "Feeding the homeless shouldn't be a crime." The silence inside her home was suffocating, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Friends no longer answered her calls. Neighbors avoided her when she walked her dog. Even the local grocer had stopped making friendly small talk at checkout. She felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her, each day more stifling than the last. Karen thought back to the confrontation at the park. At the time, she'd been convinced she was right, that calling the police was a reasonable response to what she perceived as an unwelcome disruption. But now, replaying the incident in her mind, she couldn't ignore the details she'd tried to justify. Malcolm's calm demeanor, the gratitude in the faces of the people he was helping, and the way the community had rallied behind him. One afternoon, unable to bear the weight of her own thoughts, Karen decided to walk to the park. She kept her head low, hoping to avoid recognition. When she arrived, she found a bustling but peaceful scene. Malcolm and his volunteers setting up tables, laughing and chatting as they prepared another barbecue. The smell of grilled food wafted through the air, mixing with the sound of gentle conversation. Karen lingered at a distance, her dog tugging at the leash. She watched as Malcolm handed a plate of food to a young woman holding a baby, his warm smile genuine and unwavering. The woman's tearful gratitude was evident, even from where Karen stood. Malcolm noticed Karen then. He hesitated for a moment, his expression unreadable, before walking toward her. Karen's stomach knotted as he approached, unsure of what to expect. "Karen," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Good to see you." Karen felt her cheeks flush. I just came to see what all the fuss is about," she said, her voice defensive. Malcolm nodded, offering her a plate of food. "Here," he said simply. "Have some." Karen hesitated, then took the plate reluctantly. The warmth of the food in her hands was grounding, though she didn't feel she deserved it. "I might have overreacted," she admitted softly, avoiding his gaze. Malcolm's expression softened, though he didn't let her off the hook entirely. "Maybe," he said, "but the important thing is what you do next." Karen nodded, her grip tightening on the plate. As she stood there watching the park's sense of community unfold, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of something unfamiliar, the desire to understand, to change. The weeks following the park incident marked a turning point for Malcolm's mission. What started as a grassroots effort to feed and connect with the homeless became a symbol of unity and resilience in the face of prejudice. Malcolm's barbecue events grew in size and support, drawing volunteers from all walks of life. Local businesses began stepping forward, offering to donate food and supplies. The neighborhood bakery provided fresh loaves of bread, a nearby grocer contributed fruits and vegetables, and even a local butcher started supplying cuts of meat at no cost. Malcolm, ever humble, made sure to personally thank each donor, emphasizing that the community's support was what made the effort possible. Media outlets picked up the story, framing Malcolm as a local hero. News segments highlighted the barbecue events, showing clips of volunteers flipping burgers and serving plates of food to lines of grateful attendees. Malcolm's calm response to Karen's actions was praised, and his initiative inspired discussions about systemic issues like homelessness and food insecurity. One particularly moving segment featured a mother of 3 who shared how Malcolm's barbecues had kept her family from going hungry during a difficult period. "It's not just the food," she said, holding back tears. "It's the kindness, the way he makes you feel like you matter, even when the world seems to have forgotten you." Meanwhile, Karen watched the coverage from her living room, her small dog nestled in her lap. Every feature about Malcolm felt like a reminder of her actions, her face permanently tied to the viral video. She couldn't escape the moniker BBQ Karen, which trended on social media for days. Despite the sting of public scrutiny, Karen found herself unable to look away from the news. She saw how the community rallied around Malcolm, their collective efforts proving the strength of compassion and inclusion. For the first time, she began to question her own biases. At the park, Malcolm remained focused on his mission. He was grateful for the increased support, but was careful to redirect attention back to the people he was helping. "This isn't about me," he told a reporter during an interview. "It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone and taking action to make things better. No one should go hungry or feel invisible." The event sparked broader change in the community. Inspired by Malcolm's actions, a group of residents formed a neighborhood task force to address homelessness. They partnered with local shelters and began organizing donation drives and outreach programs. Even city officials took notice, exploring policies to better support those in need. Through it all, Malcolm remained a steady presence, his quiet strength guiding the initiative. He never sought recognition or accolades, but his example ignited a ripple effect, showing what could be accomplished when a community came together. Karen, still grappling with her own feelings, watched from the sidelines. While part of her felt resentment, a growing part couldn't deny the good that had come from Malcolm's efforts, even if it had started with her mistake. Karen's days became a mix of reflection and avoidance. The viral video haunted her every time she opened her phone or turned on the TV. Social isolation set in. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street. Her usual hair salon felt cold, and her favorite cafe was a source of whispers and side-eyes. She felt trapped in the consequences of her own actions, a cage built from her prejudice, and a public unwilling to forget. One morning, Karen decided to return to the park. She told herself it was to walk her dog, but deep down, she was curious. She avoided the barbecue area at first, taking a path that circled the park's pond. But as she neared the gathering spot, she heard laughter and the clinking of plates. The scene was starkly different from the image she'd crafted in her mind. The event was organized, with volunteers efficiently serving food to a diverse group of people. Families sat on picnic blankets, chatting and enjoying the warm day. Malcolm moved between groups, carrying trays of water bottles and offering warm smiles. Karen stayed at a distance, holding her small dog close as she observed. Malcolm noticed her before she could slip away. With an inviting smile, he walked toward her, a plate of food in hand. "Hey there," he said gently, stopping a few steps away. "I figured you might be hungry." Karen hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to refuse, but something about his tone disarmed her. She took the plate reluctantly, her eyes darting around to see if anyone noticed. "I didn't come here for food," she muttered, barely meeting his gaze. "That's okay," Malcolm said, his tone light. "You're here. That's what matters." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Karen blurted out, "I was wrong about you, about this." Her words were halting, her pride visibly fighting against her conscience. Malcolm nodded, his expression kind but measured. "Takes courage to admit that," he said. "But it's not just about me. What you did that day, it's a mindset a lot of people carry, whether they realize it or not." Karen's defenses rose slightly, but she bit her tongue. Malcolm continued, his tone calm. "You don't have to fix everything today. Just start asking yourself why you reacted the way you did, why it felt easier to call the cops than to ask questions." Karen swallowed hard, nodding faintly. "Maybe I, overreacted." "Maybe," Malcolm said, smiling softly. "But you're here now, and that counts for something." Karen lingered for a while, sitting on a bench and watching the event unfold. She wasn't ready to fully confront her biases, but a small part of her felt something shift. A week later, she returned, this time offering to help. Malcolm welcomed her, putting her in charge of setting up water stations. Karen stayed quiet, her actions speaking louder than words. While she wasn't perfect, small gestures, like offering a kind word to a homeless guest or handing out utensils, hinted at a slow but genuine change. In the weeks that followed the viral incident, Malcolm's barbecue initiative blossomed into a movement. What started as a humble effort to feed the homeless now had the backing of an inspired community. Local businesses that had once turned a blind eye were now donating supplies, bags of charcoal, trays of food, and even folding tables for the events. A nearby grocery chain offered Malcolm a monthly sponsorship, providing fresh produce and bread. Word spread beyond Harper's Creek, with neighboring towns reaching out to learn how they could replicate Malcolm's model. His inbox filled with messages from people eager to volunteer or donate, their words brimming with admiration. Among them was a note from a high school sophomore named Erica, who shared how Malcolm's actions had inspired her to organize a fundraising drive at her school. Her bake sale raised over $2,000 for homeless shelters. Malcolm met with Erica one Saturday morning, handing her a t-shirt emblazoned with the barbecue's logo. "This is for you," he said, beaming. "You're part of this family now." Erica's eyes shone with pride as she promised to keep doing her part to help. The impact extended beyond individual efforts. Malcolm's story caught the attention of local media outlets, and soon he found himself on a morning news show. Sitting in a crisp blazer, he shared his story with the hosts. "This isn't about me," he said, his tone humble. "It's about the people who are often overlooked. We all have the power to make a difference if we just start showing up for each other." The audience erupted in applause as the segment ended, and Malcolm left the studio to find a line of people waiting to shake his hand. One woman handed him a check for $5,000, her voice trembling as she explained how her late brother had once been homeless. Back in Harper's Creek, Malcolm's barbecues became a unifying force. The park, once quiet and underutilized, now buzzed with life every weekend. Families brought their children to play on the swings, while volunteers served food to those in need. The boundaries between the housed and the homeless blurred, replaced by shared laughter and warm conversations. Even Karen, in her understated way, contributed. Though she still struggled with her past actions, her quiet presence at the barbecues spoke volumes. Malcolm noticed her one day, placing a bag of donated supplies on the table. She looked up, their eyes meeting briefly before she offered a small, uncertain smile. Malcolm returned it warmly. Reflecting on the journey, Malcolm felt a deep sense of purpose. The incident with Karen had been a catalyst, but it was the collective effort of the community that had created real change. As he stood on the park's grassy knoll, watching volunteers and guests mingle under the afternoon sun, he knew this was only the beginning. His story wasn't just about overcoming prejudice. It was about inspiring others to see the humanity in everyone, to stand up against injustice, and to build a better world, one meal at a time. The once overlooked park in Harper's Creek had become a vibrant symbol of unity and hope. Its pathways were alive with activity as families, volunteers, and guests gathered under a warm afternoon sun. Laughter mingled with the scent of grilled food wafting from Malcolm's barbecue setup, where a line of smiling faces waited their turn. Children ran across the open field, their playful squeals echoing as volunteers helped set up tables and distribute food. Malcolm stood by the grill, his apron smudged with barbecue sauce, his eyes scanning the crowd. He paused to take it all in. The interconnected hum of voices, the colorful banners strung between trees, the sense of belonging that now defined the space. A young boy approached, holding out a small hand-drawn thank you card. "Thank you, Mr. Malcolm," he said shyly. Malcolm crouched down, smiling warmly as he accepted the card. "No, thank you for being here," he replied. Near the tables, Karen quietly handed out plates of food to a family of 4. Her posture was still hesitant, but her actions were genuine. A year ago, she wouldn't have imagined herself here, let alone sharing space with the very community she had once tried to dismiss. She glanced toward Malcolm, who gave her an encouraging nod, as if to say, "You're doing good." Karen wasn't the only one who had changed. The park itself was transformed, not just physically, but spiritually. Where isolation and indifference once lingered, there was now connection. Local artists had painted murals on the pavilion walls, depicting scenes of kindness and resilience. A newly installed playground rang with laughter as children climbed and swung. Even the benches, once weathered and empty, were filled with people exchanging stories over cups of coffee. As the day wound down, the crowd began to thin, leaving behind a lingering sense of warmth. Malcolm walked to a quiet corner of the park, where the setting sun painted the sky in strokes of amber and rose. He leaned against the trunk of a sturdy oak tree, a plate of barbecue in his hand, and let the moment settle around him. He was joined by Officer Harper, who had been instrumental in ensuring the barbecues remained safe and supported. "This place has changed a lot," Harper remarked, his tone light but sincere. Malcolm nodded. It's not just the place, it's the people. Harper clapped a hand on Malcolm's shoulder. You made that happen, you know. Malcolm chuckled softly, shaking his head. No, it was all of us. It just took a spark. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Malcolm felt a deep sense of peace. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And though there was still work to do, he knew that together this community could face anything. Malcolm took one last look at the park, now quiet but still glowing with the day's energy, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged.